So you were breadbasket what year?
69 through 72.
Okay. So when there was a split, what happened
When
when
they
Jesse
dumped
left?
Jesse.
Yeah,
No,
did
Jesse
you
did.
did
Jesse,
you stay with breadbasket? Or?
I did. I was the only one that voted to keep Jesse.
Right.
And when I did that, they wanted to know how come.
Right.
And I said, because all eyes on me, and I
Yeah.
composed myself.
Right.
I knew I was getting ready for execution.
So let's talk about that because I was out in Chicago. I
Okay.
went out to interview Reverend Jackson. I did
Okay.
that 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, and then I did Calvin Morris as well, which was very interesting.
How did Jesse interpret it?
Well, he talked about the split, and he talked about, again, Abernathy suspending him and all of that.
What Abernathy was forced.
Right.
Primarily through Clayton Jones.
Yeah.
Because Clayton Jones, for some reason, they had antipathy toward Clayton, toward Jesse.
Right.
Because see, what Jesse did when
Yeah.
he did the A&P thing,
Yeah.
we had the press conference at A&P.
Right.
Jesse said he would never leave
Yeah.
until he met with William King, the president.
Right.
Well, on that Monday, when we were there sitting here in the headquarters building, the next day Jesse left town.
Right.
And Clayton never
Clayton was
forgave him.
forgave him, yeah. And I heard that some of the distinction between Clayton's nephew is my best friend. His name is Amos Jones, and he is
Amos is your best friend.
Yeah. Amos is my best friend.
Oh, my
So
gracious.
I know a little bit of the Joneses kind of thing, but there was also kind of these class differences it seemed between Clayton, because they came from the Bill and Clayton came from the kind of nobility in
Exactly,
Kentucky. And so they kind of looked at Jesse, I think, as being this kind of, born of a, born out of wedlock, all that.
They didn't know that at that time.
Right.
Until Jesse announced it
announced
at
it,
the New York Hill.
Okay, yeah.
That's when he first let it be known.
Right.
But what they didn't like about Jesse was when he went back to Chicago with King's blood on his dashiki.
Right.
That's what they didn't like
They
about
didn't
him.
like it.
And Hosea Williams hated him to his
ground.
Was that a true story about him?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, that's true.
Did he
absolutely.
actually have King's blood on him?
Yeah, he did.
Yeah, but he smeared it on them. I mean, he was not there. He was not cradling Dr. King as he said.
As he said.
Abernathy was right. Yeah. So yeah, I think we get into we will go as much as you want to go into that, but he was very candid. I mean, and Calvin was as well. And so what we want to do is really. Part of this project is an oral history project. What was it? What was happening there? What was the sentiments of the people who were on the ground? Because we got to document this stuff, so that's good.
Well, and now how much of my early background? Because see, I come from an activist background.
Well, I want to talk a little bit.
My father, although my father was a farmer, he was a proud black man.
I want to talk about
that
that.
allowed nobody,
Right.
even other black folk, to what should I say? To minimize it.
Let's start with there, and then
from there I would talk about my years of activism in Hoskin, North Carolina, where I led the civil rights movement, the anti-poverty
and then
program.
how it came north.
Yeah.
The key, one of the things Reverend Sharpton wants to get on tape is the how the movement that was basically a southern movement, how it came north. So we capture that.
All
All
right.
right. So I'm gonna.
Well, then you got your question.
Oh yeah, I'm ready. I'm ready. I think this is like my fourth one,
All
and
right.
then I'm writing the biography of Reverend Sharpton that's coming out later this year. So that's
Okay.
kind of a
Good.
separate one, which is about right now. It's 480 pages, and my publisher is trying to get me to.
No. What they'll do, they'll cut it down.
I
You really
know.
got to stand your ground.
Yeah. We're
Because there is a book of classic proportion
yeah.
that is on black people. That our residents in this area
Yeah.
from 1613
Right.
to 1865. It was done by the Chapel Hill Press, and he had a grant, and they chopped his work from 1,000 to 500 pages.
You know what I'm wondering? I'm sorry. All right. So, can you tell me the first time you met Reverend Sharpton?
I met Reverend.
Is that messing up your noise? Okay.
That's a heating system.
So, Reverend Scott, tell me, when did you first meet Reverend Sharpton?
I met Reverend Sharpton in, I think it was on October the 23rd, 1969, upon my coming to New York. And we had the ribbon cutting ceremony for the opening of Brett Baskett's office.
You were the executive director.
I had just come in as executive director, and it was at 1271 Fulton Street, on the second floor of the Carver Building. And when we had the ribbon cutting, Gardner Taylor was there, Jesse Jackson, Mahalia Jackson, and this little boy, Al Sharpton. He was a very, very warm and kind of a cuddly kind of a guy, and so that's where I first met him.
And what were your first impressions of him at that time? Because he was, I imagine, a youth leader within Breadbasket. He was active, right?
Well, he was not a youth leader at that
not
time.
at that time,
He
okay.
says he was 13.
Yeah.
But he was very warm.
Yeah.
Very public. Not shy. Not withdrawn. You know, he had a presence about him. And I remember that. Yes.
And how was the decision made to appoint him at some point to be a youth leader within Breadbasket?
Well, when he became associated with Reverend Jones, although Reverend Jones at that time was not his pastor, Reverend Jones became his mentor. And he later joined Reverend Jones' church as a teenager. And so when he joined the church, we had the Breadbasket rallies in the fellowship hall of Bethany Church. And so Jones appointed him as head of the youth division of Operation Breadbasket.
Right.
Yeah, that was his first appointment as the head of the, not president, but just the head of the youth division of Operation Breadbasket. Yeah.
Can you recall some of those early campaigns that you all were involved in with Breadbasket that Reverend Sharpton would have been involved in?
Yes, we were involved in a campaign against Martin's Department Store there in the heart downtown of Brooklyn. He was involved in that with other ministers, C.E. Nesbitt, George Murray, the late, all of them are the late Tim Mitchell. Tim Mitchell was very prominent in that demonstration. We had to demonstrate in I guess about a week before they came to the table, negotiating table, to sign a contract, because with all our efforts, we wanted to get the upward mobility of blacks and others hired in all of the department stores. Whenever we would come to an agreement, we would have a covenant signing. And he was a part of that. He was also a part of the, well, actually, let's get back to the Saturday morning meeting. Reverend Sharpton brought in Eddie Kendricks, brother of the famed Kendricks, who was the guitarist, to build our youth Breadbasket choir. And when Kendricks couldn't be there, Eddie Kendricks, he just passed, couldn't be there, he brought in Herman Stevens, who was James Cleveland's musician.
Wow.
Yeah, because Herman Stevens used to play for Charles Memorial Church of God in Christ on Amsterdam. Herman Stevens also played for James Cleveland.
And Reverend Sharpton would have known that through the church circles
Exactly.
at Washington Temple.
At Washington Temple, because Bishop Charles and F.D. Washington were very close.
Interesting.
Yeah,
Interesting.
yeah. So he really got to see a wider world as a boy through F.D. Washington, because F.D. Washington was known all over the country because he was a radio, or he was a gospel preacher, and his wife was a gospel singer.
Ernestine.
Yeah, Ernestine, my grandmama,
Wow.
way down in the woods of North Carolina, has a book that she gave to me in memory of Ernestine Washington. That was the church he came out of.
Was it unusual at that time for young people to be involved in Breadbasket and the movement? I mean, did Reverend Sharpton stick out because he was so young? I'm just curious to.
To a degree, but as you remember, the civil rights movement primarily was made of hordes of young people.
Yeah.
That was the hit against Dr. King, that he was leading the youth of America astray. Like the Pied Piper who led the kids with his pipe over the hills into the water. That was the symbol. So in New York, we didn't have that many, but he really one who stood out. Yes, he stood out. But it was not unusual for the civil rights movement.
Because the movement was a southern-based movement.
Yeah.
And then it came north.
Right.
Can you talk a little bit about how Dr. King was able to bring it along with Reverend Jackson, Jesse Jackson, and others to Brooklyn? How did it come from
Well,
SCLC?
what he did, he had a vision of economic justice.
Yes.
What we talking about right now, and income equality. That was his theme when he began the Poor People's March And what he did, he got the Ford Foundation to fund the organization he called Breadbasket. Wyatt Walker, who now lives in Chester, Virginia, was the person who gave that name, Breadbasket. And so the Ford Foundation funded the erection of 20 chapters in America, one of which was Brooklyn, and they met in Miami, Florida, and established the various chapters, and Jones brought it back to Brooklyn. That's how it got to Brooklyn.
And Jones, of course, had a connection to Dr. King. His father was roommates, I believe, with Dr. King's father at Morehouse College, and so they knew each other through Crozer Theological Seminary.
Well, Dr. King was a graduate of Crozer,
Right.
one of Jones's upperclassmen.
Right.
So
Now-
Jones is a graduate of Crozer, and I'm a graduate of Crozer.
Is that right?
We all
Now,
graduated.
how did you become executive director? Tell me a little bit about how you got that position.
Well, I was a radical, a reformer in eastern North Carolina. When I went to my first church at 25, 1963, the civil rights movement was flaming. And when I accepted the church, I wrote God a letter, and I said, I do not know where I will stand in this movement. But wherever I stand, I want to stand on the side of what was right. And so I began, and in that same year, we had the Freedom Rallies, and they had them at my church. And Wyatt Walker was the executive secretary of SCLC, and he was the speaker while I was a student, still at Crozer.
Is that right?
And yeah, when I had that Freedom Rally there at New Ahoskie Baptist Church in Ahoskie, North Carolina, I brought the news clipping back and put it on the board. And my professor said to me, I need to go slow, slow down. And it enraged me. And I said before the whole class, he didn't throw me out the class though. I told him the problem was, that was the problem. We had been too slow too long.
Now, you were born, though, in an activist family, right? I mean, your father was a farmer, but he was also very involved in civil rights work. Is that
Well,
correct?
I never knew it until my mother told me he always carried an NAACP membership.
Wow.
And the NAACP throughout the South was looked upon as a part of the Communist Party. You know, the whole propaganda, you were a communist. And Daddy, but when you own your own, you could take your stand. Nobody could jeopardize your rights except the Ku Klux Klan. And he was a person that didn't take any insults, deliberate insults from the larger community, from the white community. And so I grew up determined that we were going to change this. We were going to change the system. Because when I was 5 years old, I wanted to go see Gene Autry, the Cowboys. And I was 5 years old walking the main street of Roanoke Rapids, North Carolina, which is the nearest town where I come from. And I wanted to go into the theater. Daddy said we couldn't go. I said, well, how come? He said, because we are colored and there's nowhere for us to go. But somehow or another, at 5, I understood what he meant. And I said to him these words, Daddy, when I get to be a big boy, I'm going to change this.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
But he was a proud, independent person. He demanded every ounce of his rights. He was no Uncle Tom. No, sir.
How many children were there?
Well, there were 6 of us. My twin brother passed when he was 6 months old. But there were 5 of us, 5 boys. Yeah.
So how did you get from the South North Carolina to New York?
Well, okay. With the rallies going on there in Ahosca, North Carolina, after I became pastor, Reverend Jones was my upperclassman at Crozer, so I would have him to come down to do revivals for me there in Ahosca, and he became aware of the integration of the school system, because they never intended to integrate the schools. The Supreme Court decision meant nothing, because I went there in '63, and that's 9 years later, and they had not, the schools were still segregated. And so I filed suit to integrate the schools. I filed suit against the hospital, integrate the hospitals. When they passed the Civil Rights Bill of 1964, I paid the students to go into all the restaurants, all the Woolworths and so forth. So Jones knew my activity, and that's how come he decided to bring me here to work with him in Brooklyn with Operation Red.
So he hired you.
Yes.
And had you met Dr. King? Or Dr. King had already passed by then?
No. I met Dr. King in I guess it was in '63 upon my entry. That must have had to be '61 or '62 in my years at Crozer.
Okay.
And he was a speaker at Bill Gray's father's church.
Bright Hope.
Philadelphia.
Mm-hmm.
And afterwards, Jones introduced me to him, and we shook hands, and he told me, do well while it's true.
Wow. So when you became executive director of Breadbasket here in New York, how old were you at the time?
I was 29.
Wow. So you were young.
Yeah.
And what were your day-to-day responsibilities as executive director?
Well, my day-to-day, we would meet with heads of corporations, and my responsibility was to set up the meetings and to corral all the clergy, the negotiating team, to make sure that we were aware of the meetings, and to keep them informed of the meetings, and whatever else had to be done, I was Reverend Jones, his right-hand man.
So you were on the payroll of SCLC?
Foundation, on the
foundation.
SCLC Foundation.
Do you remember how much you were paid?
$12,000.
$12,000. Wow, interesting.
Yeah.
And so your relationship with Reverend Jones, how was that throughout the time when you were executive director? Well, I know he is very hands-on in many ways.
Well, Jones was my big brother.
Yeah.
I'm the oldest in my family. We met when I was a student at Crozer in my first year, and I heard so much about this guy, Bill Jones. I said, I'll be glad when I meet Bill Jones. So we were walking up the hallway to the Buckdale, of the sidewalk to the Buckdale Crozer Library, and I saw this tall, what shall I say, prince-looking fella, and something just said to me, that's Bill Jones. I said, we spoke. I said, I think you Bill Jones. He said, I am.
With a deep voice.
Yeah, very melodious, almost symphonic.
Yeah.
And from that time on, we were just like blood brothers.
Wow.
Yeah.
And you were in touch the whole time.
Yeah, well, right. He gave me my first sermon to preach in the Crozer Chapel, and he took me to my first convention in St. Louis, Missouri, where J.H. Jackson was fighting against Martin Luther King, and the St. Louis Dispatch had J.H.'s picture on one side and King on the other. And matter of fact, he was the one that inspired me to come to the March on Washington. I think that was 1963, wasn't it?
Oh,
yeah. He called me up because it was dark there. It was frightening to come from the South because you were under constant watch. And you had to pass through all them woods. You didn't know where the Ku Klux Klans were.
Right.
But I drove by night.
Wow.
To D.C. and we were together. So we worked together from seminary days right on.
So during those years, I imagine you were also interfacing with Ralph Abernathy and Reverend Jesse Jackson, because Jesse Jackson was the head of the National Breadbasket
Correct.
at the time. And I was wondering, what was the relationship like between the Brooklyn chapter and national?
Well, we parallel what Jesse was doing in Chicago. We did not have the rallies here when I came. It was the minister's fellowship breakfast. So when I was hired, the first thing I did went to Chicago, and I met with Jesse and went out to his breadbasket rally and saw what we had to do here in New York. And I saw the breadbasket orchestra headed by Ben Branch. No, you're Ben Branch. You know, who prayed "Precious Lord." And what was the musician's name? He's now famed. This is the world.
Not Thomas Dorsey, no.
No, the black musician.
Oh, Michael Jackson.
No.
Oh, Quincy Jones.
Quincy Jones.
Yes,
Quincy directed
Yes.
the breadbasket orchestra.
Is that right?
Yeah, in Chicago.
Huh.
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't know that.
And so I met Jesse and Calvin Morris and Willie Barrow, his executive secretary, and had a grand time. Chauncey Eskers, who was the chair of SCLC Foundation. And so we paralleled what they did. So I came back and I helped to initiate our breadbasket rally meeting. We didn't have a rally when I came. I helped to develop that. And then I said to convince Jones we had to have a black expo here, because I attended the black expo out there with the Reverend George Murray, who pastored Mount Pisgah, where John Ray Youngblood is now. Murray and I went to observe Black Expo in Chicago to duplicate the same thing here.
And were you able to do that?
Yes, we were. We were able to do it in 1971. November 4th, 5th, and 6th at the Statler Hilton, and they stood in line 4 deep for the 3 days we had the Black Business and Cultural Exposition there at what was at that time known as the Statler Hilton.
Do you remember Ralph Abernathy and Hosea Williams and those who were part of King's, who were advisors to Dr. King?
Yeah, I met Reverend Abernathy through the A&P struggle.
Wow.
He came here and sat in with us at the lobby of the Gray Bar building.
Talk a little bit about that struggle and what it entailed, because I think a lot of people don't know what that was really about, the A&P struggle.
Well, at that time, A&P had 500 stores metro-wide, with only out of all of the 500 managers, only 2 black managers. All the rest of them were in lower-paying jobs, not many cashiers, and at that time, A&P was a $5.7 billion operation. They didn't have any money, and they had no blacks on the board of directors. We demanded a percentage on board of directors. Hobart Taylor became the first one, who was Lyndon Johnson's legal counsel. Out of 75 directors, there were no blacks. There was no money in black banks. There was no black money for black advertising. Only a minuscule amount of service contractors, and nothing from no philanthropic contribution to black causes or colleges. And we tried to meet with William Kane to negotiate what the situation was. And what happened was Huntington Hartford, heir to the A&P fortune, heard about us, and somehow or another he contacted Reverend Jones and said that he was interested in helping to bring about greater justice through the A&P Corporation. He met with us. As you can see the picture here in Reverend Al's office, it's on the wall. Huntington Hartford he endorsed the boycott, the effort to try to meet. And when everything was exhausted, we met at the Overseas Press Club at 40 West 40th Street. And we announced a nationwide boycott. And we marched on a snowy day to 460 Lexington Avenue, which was the headquarters of the A&P. And it was Jesse was there, Imar Baraka, who is now just deceased, quite a delegation, quite a throng of ministers.
Was Reverend Sharpton there? I believe he was.
Yeah,
there.
he was there. Yes,
Yeah.
he was there. Yes.
Which was unusual because he probably should have been in school.
He should have. Well, that what Clayton Jones said, that some kind of law that they were violating for arresting a minor.
Oh, I see.
Because we sat in overnight, we sat in all afternoon overnight, and the next day they started arresting us. And it was 3 days sit-in, wave after wave. And we never did meet with William King, but we did get a black on the board of directors who was Hobart Taylor. They did put money into black banks. I believe that Von Blaine Enterprise got a advertising contract. They put money into Amsterdam News, and what they gave to black causes. I have no knowledge of that.
Right.
Yeah.
And I imagine that this campaign generated national headlines, so other people in other cities were finding out what was happening in New York.
It was nationwide, and President Nixon at that time became very much aware of it. And there was a congressman out here on Long Island who contacted Reverend Jones, who was Nixon's right-hand man. I forget his name now. Not Gazelle, something sounded like Gazelle. We're talking about 40-some years ago. But we were determined that we were going to bring about a just solution. So we did not call off the boycott. Yeah.
When you look back on those early days, really Breadbasket being, the product of SCLC and continuing the tradition that Dr. King had started, I was wondering, do you see kind of Reverend Sharpton continuing in that lineage all these years later? The kind of Dr. King legacy that he put forth?
Yes, because see, the theme for Breadbasket was your ministers fight for jobs and rights. And Reverend Sharpton has been about that whole thing about social justice as well as economic justice. Jesse has tried to duplicate that to some extent with his Wall Street project as it relates to economic justice, because Dr. King had a vision that covered 5 areas. It was first, interstate travel. Second, public accommodation. Third, voter participation. Fourth, non-discrimination housing. And fifth, just wage, a guaranteed annual income. Nobody, they talking about income equality. King was for a guaranteed annual income. So Reverend Sharpton is really on the cutting edge as he deals with this issue about income equality. And let's see, I think that, but in a way, he's dealt more with the justice issues. We dealt with the Amadou Diallo situation and the Sean Bell situation. I know he's signed a few contracts with some of the major businesses in terms of, was it not Dennis? What was the company that they signed a contract with? It was a restaurant chain.
But you see him very much in the lineage and the tradition
Oh.
of Dr. King.
And he's in the vein,
Yeah.
in the mainstream.
Right.
He's matter of fact, he's almost mild compared to King, because King was one of the most hated men in America.
Right. The reason why I ask that is because I think a lot of people have tried to say that, again, Reverend Sharpton didn't come out of the King tradition when you were there in
Yeah.
the early years. So you
Yeah.
remember that he was involved and was active
Right.
in the movement.
Right.
And you watched him grow. And I was wondering, did you all, because he's younger than you, you're 75 now?
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm wondering, did you ever imagine that he would have gone on at that young age to be?
Yes, I did.
You do, yeah.
Because Al embodied, he embodied the spirit and envisioned the dream that what Dr. King was all about. Even as a kid, we knew he was destined for greatness.
So you knew it right away.
From the beginning, he was a leader as a teenager.
Yeah. One of the things that Reverend Calvin Morris told me that right from the beginning, he also fell in love with Reverend Jesse Jackson. I was wondering, did you see that as well? His respect that he had for Reverend Jackson, and almost that he wanted to emulate and be like him.
Well, he first fell in love with Reverend Jones.
Reverend Jones, okay.
Yeah, Reverend Jones was the one that really, what shall I say, gave him direction and gave him exposure. And when Jesse came on in the scene with the A&P struggle, that's when he met Jesse. And well, Jesse, they both fell in love with each other. And Al really was on the national scene. He was more with Jesse after that than he was with us. Which we were kind of a little chagrined about it.
Right, because he wanted to be like him so much.
Yeah, right.
That was interesting.
But he had to go with the tide of history. That was the tide of history.
And Jesse was probably a little younger than some of you, right?
Right, not only younger, but Jesse was freer.
Yeah.
He was not bound in the traditional trapping of the clergy. See, Reverend Jones was a pastor, and certainly we have as clergy, we are sort of within the traditional trappings of the clergy. We are not free to be altogether avant-garde as Jesse was. And so Al saw the freedom that he had with Jesse that he really didn't, he wouldn't be sort of like circumscribed
To a
as
church.
much with us.
Right.
Yeah.
Because even though Jesse came out of Clay Evans' church, was affiliated with Clay Evans' church in Chicago, he was not a pastor of his own congregation. So that had a separate, I imagine, degree of responsibility.
Well, Jesse was a leader of a movement.
Yeah, movement.
I mean, that Chicago
Yeah.
movement, man, it drew world attention. Matter of fact, Dan Rather even followed Jesse in his activities with his rally there and for how he dealt with Mayor Daley at that time. Yeah. So he had greater freedom with Jesse.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So you were executive director from 69 to 72.
Correct.
And then there was a split that took place.
Right.
Where, I guess Reverend Abernathy suspended Reverend Jackson
Sure.
after the Black Expo.
Yeah.
And I know that Reverend Sharpton left Breadbasket, but then he went off and he started his own organization, which was the National Youth Movement. And I was wondering, where were you at that time? Did you remain loyal to the Breadbasket folks? Because, of course, Reverend Jackson then went off and started Operation Push. So I was wondering, where were you at politically, ideologically during that time period?
I was right in the middle of it, ironically and regrettably. We met at 405 Fifth Avenue, right across from the library, to discuss the fate of Jesse. And to make a long story short, I said to them, the day you suspend Jesse Jackson, head of Operation Breadbasket, is the day you remove the head from the body. And the body cannot live without the head, which enraged Clayton Jones.
Bill Jones's brother.
Bill Jones's brother. Because he never forgave Jesse for saying he would never leave New York until he met the William Kane. But after the sit-in, he left the next day. And Clayton held that against him across the years. And so when they met in Chicago, the sad scene to me was to see Jesse coming out of the hotel when he had been suspended. And I knew he could not just be inactive for indefinitely. I think they suspended him, I don't know whether for 6 months or a year. But two things was, I knew that the future of Breadbasket was doomed. I had no doubt about it.
Yeah.
Second, I knew that Jesse was the engine that fired Breadbasket. And third, I knew at that time that without Jesse there, then it was time for me to move on. And so what I did following that, I began looking for my own, looking to go back into the pastorate, which I did. Yeah, so I was caught right in the. Matter of fact, I was told to be fired. Somebody said, matter of fact, it's in the book. Clayton told his brother, Jennifer's father, fire that in. I don't say the other part of it. And I broke down and went and began crying. Because I was the only one that stood for Jesse. Even Ozzie Davis was there. And Ozzie, he regretted until his death that he did not call Abernathy down in Atlanta and ask him to call off that meeting that they were going to have there in Chicago with Clayton Jones as Abernathy's lawyer. They silenced Johnson because they figured that Johnson was for Jesse. And they silenced him. So it was, to me, it was a very dark point in black history because Brett Baskin had the eye and the ear of the nation toward economic equity, not equality, economic equity, our just due as a people. And in a sense, with his removal, we lost that fight.
And so then you came to Harlem to start a church?
I was called, no, I didn't start. I was called. During that time, I met a person who worked with the Lindsay administration, who was a member of St. John's Baptist Church, and put in my name, and I candidated for the church, and got called as pastor at 32.
And been there ever since?
Been there ever since.
So your relationship with Reverend Jackson, did that remain tight after Bread Basket kind of dissolved? Did you stay in touch with him, or into this? Are you still fairly close to him? Yeah.
I have a deep love for him.
Right.
I always had a deep love for him because if history could be rewritten, he really should have been the one who succeeded King as the head of SAOC.
You think over Abernathy?
Yes.
Yeah.
Abernathy was burnt out.
Right. And I also heard that he had more fire and charisma than Abernathy.
Without a doubt.
Is that true?
Without a doubt. Jesse had the enthusiasm, the dynamism, the charisma, the articularity. He knew how to cut through issues just like a newspaper man. And so he would have been the rightful heir to the lawful heir to the leadership of SCOC.
And he had a crazy work ethic. I mean, he worked like 17-hour days.
Well,
Right.
but people get up 4:30 in the morning
Right,
and
right.
have staff meetings.
Yeah.
And he would have continued right in the same vein of King, but out of sentiment, because I was a part of the meeting in Chicago, I had been elected as by the Ford Foundation as one of the persons to go to the Urban Training Center. They paid your way to Chicago, paid your way there, your lodge and everything. And so I was out there in Chicago when King got killed. And when I flew home that weekend, that's when he got killed on the 4th of April. That was a Friday. When I got back on that Monday, the place was in smoke and everything. And so the big debate was who was going to succeed Dr. King. They thought that Coretta wanted to succeed. They said, no, she couldn't do that. But the sentiment and the ties were so to Abernathy so that they just couldn't break away from him.
And they were close. They were best friends, right?
Yeah.
Dr. King. Yeah.
And that tension is not over yet. You ever talk to Juanita?
I have, yes. Yeah. It's all she believes that obviously that her husband was not given his due, and that he deserved to, and almost she kind of faulted him for taking the back seat and kind of deferring to Dr. King throughout periods of history, which is
Her and her son,
yeah,
who was an attorney.
yeah. So when you look back on those days as a movement, it seemed like it was a real exciting time, but it was also difficult. And I was wondering, what were some of the more obvious challenges for you all during Breadbasket days?
You mean nationwide or here?
We're here in New York.
Well,
Was
here,
it to get people involved and engaged? I mean, what was the real challenge? Money, was that an issue? Or?
the money was not an issue. The challenge was really this was the headquarters for the major Fortune 500 corporations here in the country, here in Wall Street. And the challenge was we wanted to deal with a major company in a particular industry, because before I got here, Jones and them had dealt with the bread industry, Tasty Freeze. Then they dealt with the bottling industry. I came on board when they dealt with Pepsi-Cola and Coca-Cola. Then they went into the retail industry when they dealt with Martin's Department Store, as well as A&S, took cue from my department store. We never did deal with Macy's, but beyond that, we had envisioned to even deal with the automobile industry. But with the removal of Jesse, that movement just lost its momentum. It lost its impetus.
It never got off the ground. It never got off the ground.
It never soared like it did before. It just plummeted.
Gotcha.
It was off the ground.
Yeah.
It was soaring. We were covered by over 14 major networks: ABC, CBS, NBC, British Broadcasting Network, all from all around the country and around the world. And my plea with Reverend Jones was to have them to leave Jesse alone, because we could not even, that's another challenge, we could not take care of all of the 5 boroughs of New York, more or less 32 states in the nation. Because we had a Queens chapter through Tim Mitchell at Ebenezer Baptist Church, Kenneth Folks of Mount Carmel Baptist Church in the Bronx, Reverend Earl Moore of St. Paul's Baptist Church in Harlem. But we never even really got to Harlem. The president of the Apollo Theater offered us the Apollo Theater to meet twice a month. Clayton helped to shoot it down. Reverend Jones was very much interested in it, but for some reason or another, did you know when you write history, you can't tell everything?
Well, I was wondering what his opposition would have been to that, Clayton's.
I think, well, he felt that he could greater control over his brother by operating from a Brooklyn base, and he was probably feared that it would have such a wider audience and a wider, what should I say, have a wider influence. So much so, it would probably change the dynamic of Breadbasket meeting directly with major corporations. I think he probably feared it going off course. And being at the Apollo Theater, he probably figured that it would become more an entertainment and an arena, but it would not have. Because Reverend Jones was a had very conservative ethics. He didn't believe in alcohol, use of alcohol. So many times when we would have these events, we had, like, for example, we had an awards banquet. The first and only one that's ever been held in this city in 1971, whereby we honored 25 major contributors to the advancement of civilization, including President Nyerere of Tanzania.
Where was that? The Waldorf?
At the Commodore Hotel.
Commodore Hotel.
Commodore Hotel.
Oh, interesting. So you stayed, even though you took you took the pastorship of St. John's. You stayed involved in activism and civil rights even after you left.
It's in my blood.
It's in your blood. Yeah.
Like Al say, if you can leave it, you were not a part of it in the first. You just went along with it.
Right.
But it's in my calling.
Yeah. Yeah. And had you kept in touch with Reverend Sharpton all those years, even after?
Oh yes.
Bread Basket was over.
Yes. Yes, I have. I did, and always believed the best about it.
Mm-hmm.
He
even through the controversy.
That's what I'm gonna say. But I always believe the best about it.
Right.
I just believe that sometimes when Don King is like being caught up in the moment.
Yeah.
And one other thing, but sometimes you can get swayed, but I think that's a maturing process.
Sure.
That he's come through.
Sure, because when he went during the period when he went with James Brown, was involved with him. Did you keep in touch, or did you guys kind of?
We were distant at that time.
Yeah. But then you got back in touch.
Well, he was not that active in activism when he was with James Brown. It was near the end there when he really began his meetings over on Madison Avenue. I would attend them over there.
Yeah, and then how did you become a board member of National Action Network?
Oh, well, he nominated me, out of respect for my years of involvement in the early days, and as well as he honored me as one of the, gave me a Social Justice Award for my work in Bread Basket. At the same time, Fred Shuttlesworth was one of the honorees who led the Birmingham movement, and Gardner Taylor. We were the three honorees. I felt pretty honored in such tall cotton at that time.
I can imagine. Reverend Y.T. Walker told me that he thought it was strategic that Reverend Sharpton asked him to be the chairman of the board of National Action Network because it gave further connection to the Dr. King connection piece. I was wondering, did you see it that way? I mean, in many ways, you and Dr. Walker come out of that tradition. And so, again, having you all around, I think kind of affirms the fact that National Action Network is really a continuation of SCLC.
Wine made the connection.
Yeah.
Wine made the connection. He dropped the mantle on him. And that was a great contribution he made to endorse Al and to uphold him and become his board chairman. And
because he told me that at the time, a lot of black preachers were a little distant from Reverend Sharpton, weren't sure whether or not to embrace him.
Black preachers were distant from the movement, period.
Okay.
We never had to hoard of them. It's never been told.
Yeah.
But they voted Dr. King out of the National Baptist Convention. Are you aware of that?
Right. He had to go through the Progressive National.
No, it didn't exist.
Right. So he had to go start it. Yeah.
The Progressive was birthed
Right.
as a result of their action toward Dr. King.
Right.
So it was always the faithful few, even here in New York.
Yeah. That's interesting.
The faithful few.
Yeah.
They would give us moral support and spiritual support, but troops, being troopers and so forth, it was more of an interfaith group.
Yeah.
We had some of the Jewish, the Reformed Jewish synagogue supported it. For example, our A&P effort through Balfour Brickner and Riverside Church. Ernie Campbell was the pastor at that time, went to jail with us. And the Catholic Diocese of Brooklyn and Manhattan, and the priests of St. Peter. So the clergy were more of a cross section of the major strains of Christianity, Protestant and Catholic.
Interesting. Final question: when you look at the kind of national landscape, there are a number of civil rights organizations still active and involved. NAACP, National Action Network. You got the National Urban League. I guess what is your prognosis? Where do you sort of see things moving in terms of social justice issues in the future?
Apart from Al, I don't see much happening overall, institutionally wise or systematically, let's say systematically. This is what caused King just found SCLC, as you well know, that the battle had been too long with NAACP through the legal courts and the Urban League, mostly doing what they consider social work. And you know, the SCLC Foundation there in Atlanta. So you know, it's really, to my way, it's sad because during the time when I came to New York was just humming. We had ICBO. We had a number of major civil rights organizations in this town, birthed right here in New York. Capital formation in terms of black entrepreneurship and black empowerment. Same thing with ICBO, because the president of ICBO at one time was a Rockefeller heir and president of Citibank.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, in terms of the empowerment of black businessmen and going to the business. We had over 70 major welfare rights organizations. They've all gone away.
Wow.
So,
You also had the Black Nationalists too, right, in those early days, right?
without a doubt.
Yeah, and I was wondering, could you talk a little bit about was there tensions between those of you who came out of the, nonviolent kind of activist struggle and the Black Nationalists? How did you all deal with each other?
Well, that was a tension. I think that was a certain respectability we had with one another with the Panthers. We knew the Panthers here in this city, and but we sort of stayed at arm's length from them because we didn't believe in taking up arms, and the Panthers believed in protecting yourself, with arms, and there was another group called Nats Coming, and then the Black Muslims here. We always had a certain respect for each other, but no real partnership. No.
Yeah,
No partnership.
right. And I imagine there would have been a struggle for members too, particularly young people. They had options in terms of whether or not they were going to get involved in the movement, and if so, were they going to join the Black Panthers or join Breadbasket, right? In terms of young people joining an organization, becoming members, I imagine you would have to be competing with the Black Nationalists to get the young people involved in Breadbasket, no?
No, really, I didn't see
No.
the competition.
Okay.
The NAACP had a large phalanx of young people. They used to major in having young people with being having a membership card. And I think people voluntarily join whatever group they felt they were comfortable with. So if you want to be a Panther, you join the Panthers. If you want to be with the Muslims, you join with the Muslims. Whatever you felt comfortable, whatever group you felt comfortable with. There was no competition.
Right.
I didn't see any.
Okay. Well, that's helpful to think about it in that way. That there were enough groups out there for people to go with their interests.
Exactly. Because Breadbasket was primarily by church, most by members of congregations and people at large in the community.
Ministers.
Yeah, ministers and lay people. But as far as membership, Breadbasket, we didn't even have a membership. It was all voluntary.
Was there a board of Breadbasket in Brooklyn? A board of directors, or?
That was an executive committee.
Executive committee.
Yes. That was Reverend Jones, chairperson. Herb Daltrey was vice chair.
Is that right?
Who in the Black United Front.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, and as you saw, that Herb and I appeared together with a radio station. L.P. Taylor of Glover Memorial Baptist Church. Who was I? I think we had a treasurer, but there was a core. Ed Wharton, George Murray. That was a core of clergy that made up the leadership core of Breadbasket.
So one final question. So when you left Breadbasket, did they hire another? Were you the only executive director to ever serve, or was there someone else in a leadership position?
When I left, it was right on the after Black Expo, and that was a lay person named Ron Walters. They hired Ron to carry on the day-to-day activities, and I think he transferred his office to 15 Featherbed Lane, right opposite, right across from City Hall.
Okay.
Yeah, I think he was like the last hired staff person on Breadbasket.
And then it disbanded.
And then that, I guess, just came apart.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, brother. This was really fun. I
Well,
enjoyed this. This
well,
was
thank
great.
God,
Thank you.
Thank God.
Thank you.
I hope that we'll have some input for what's a greater action on our part. Cause like Reverend Sharpton said, that was a telltale statement he was making this morning about to be like Jesus. What does it mean to be like Jesus?
Yeah.
And to be like Jesus is to be out there where the people are hurting
Right.
and where they're suffering.
Yeah. Well, thank you. It's important
Yes,
to document our story and to make sure we have it. So thank you.
Okay, very well. Thank you.
All right.
Yeah.
This was good, right?
Oh, man, excellent.
It was good, huh?
Excellent.